Welcome to the Everyday Fan podcast. I'm your host, Gary Sparrow, and I'm here to talk to fans, longtime fans, super fans, just diehard fans of any team, any sport, and just kind of wanted to have an intro podcast here to just kind of go over what I'm looking for. I'm looking for stories. I'm looking for how you became a fan of whatever team it is we're talking about. Like I said, some of y'all have seen my TikTok videos about the Braves. Braves baseball is my number one sport. The Braves are my favorite team. So that's kind of what I've focused on those. But I wanted to branch out with this podcast and talk about some other sports, other teams, and get the perspective of just everyday fans, like the title says, the Everyday Fan Podcast. Just people that, they're not so-called experts about a sport or a team. They're not pundits, they're not writers, journalists, broadcasters, just everyday fans. A lot of times we as fans are more passionate about the team that we're talking about. We know a lot about it and we have different perspectives maybe. And that's kind of what I'm looking for. I'm looking for those perspectives, those stories, like I said, how you became a fan. So I'm going to kick this thing off and just kind of talk about me, how I became a baseball fan and a Braves fan, and just kind of let you know these are the kind of things I'm looking for. And I'm looking for anybody that wants to participate, anybody that wants to be on the podcast, send me a message, reach out to me, the Everyday Fan Podcast at gmail.com, or you can find me on TikTok. If you're already following me, just shoot me a message, comment on one of the TikToks and say, hey, I want to be on, and I will set it up. We'll get a time and we'll start recording them. Got some already planned out, and they'll be coming out here soon after this one is released. So just really looking forward to it, having a good time with it, having some good conversations. So getting back to where I started, my baseball journey kind of starts and ends with my dad. He was a baseball player, very, very good baseball player back in high school and college. He went to Fulton High School back in the 50s and, city all-star back then in high school, played on the American Legion team that was really good. In fact, a very interesting thing that I didn't find out till years later after I was born, he participated when he was in high school, his American Legion team participated in back then what was called the Have Atlanta Games. And it was a kind of a competition, mini Olympics, I guess, with different sports between Cuba and the United States and the Atlanta teams, specifically the Atlanta area. So he actually, when he was in high school, got to travel to Cuba to play baseball against a Cuban team down there. So, back in the 50s before the Cuban Missile Crisis and all that kind of thing. So really interesting story that I got to learn from him at one point. But so after high school, he got a scholarship to the University of Georgia. Back then, freshmen couldn't play on the varsity team, but he was a 3-year varsity starter and played third base when he was in Georgia. I think he played shortstop in high school, but very good player in Georgia, led the team in hitting one year. So, just a really good baseball player. Back then, they didn't have a draft. So I know some people are probably thinking, hey, did he go to the major leagues? Did he try out? He did get an offer to go to I think it was a St. Louis Cardinals training camp, and he decided not to. Back then, baseball players did not get paid a lot. Even the stars back then, a lot of them had jobs in the off season to kind of make ends meet. So it wasn't a lucrative financially to be a baseball player. So he got married not too long after college. Had kids, raised a family. So he chose to go into the workforce and not pursue baseball at that point. He did play some semi-pro baseball around the Atlanta area, and then later played a lot of softball, fast pitch softball a lot, and even in his 70s, he played on a over 70 softball team that was really good, traveled around the Southeast playing. So he kept his athletic skills for a long time, but he always loved baseball and, like I said, kind of instilled that in me when I was growing up, and that's kind of how my baseball love started, came from him. And I love all sports, but baseball's, like I said, kind of my number one. We did have a some really interesting baseball journeys when we were in Texas. We traveled around a lot for his job, lived all over the country, and when we were in Texas back in the early '70s is when the Washington Senators moved to Texas and became the Texas Rangers. So we were able to go to one of the first seasons, one of the first games for the Texas Rangers. Back then, Billy Martin, famous for being a Yankees manager, was actually the manager of the Texas Rangers that season. So got to go to a Texas Rangers game then. We moved to the Kansas City area after that, and that was the first year they built the Royal Stadium. And so got to go to some Kansas City Royals games. They had the, fountains in the outfield, which was a new thing back then, really state of the art, really beautiful stadium back then in the '70s. So got to go there some. While we were in Kansas City, Hank Aaron was chasing the Babe Ruth home run record and actually saw, live on TV when he hit 715 against the Dodgers and broke the record back in '74. And soon after that, we moved back to Atlanta where my parents were from. And, that's kind of became a Braves fan watching Hank Aaron. And then we moved to Atlanta. And it was like at that time, I discovered a TV station that was WTCG back then, Channel 17, the UHF station. For those of you that don't know what that is, like some of y'all younger people, you actually had the antenna, the little round rabbit ears antenna that you used to pick up the over the air stations. And that was one of them in the Atlanta area. And it was owned by Ted Turner. I had no idea who Ted Turner was back then, but I just know I found the station and they were showing all the Braves games. And Ted Turner owned the team. He bought the Braves, owned the TV station. Didn't know a whole lot about that back then. I was, you know, I was 10, 11, 12 years old, but I knew I got to watch all the Braves games and really fell in love with the team at that point. They had some struggles back then. Weren't a great team until the had a really good season in the early '80s, which we'll get to that in a minute. But so we moved to Atlanta, loved the Braves, got to watch them, and then me and my dad went to our very first home Braves game at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium back then, and it was back then they called them twilight doubleheaders. You actually got to see two games for one ticket. Now they split the doubleheaders up, where you have to buy tickets to each game. But twilight doubleheader started kind of in the afternoon and went through the night, and went to a game against the Cincinnati Reds, Big Red Machine, coming off a World Series, and had all the all-stars on their team: Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, Pete Rose, Dave Concepcion, Tony Perez, Hall of Famers, great team. And even though the Braves weren't real good, a lot of people wanted to see the Reds, so it was a sold-out game, standing room only. We had standing room only tickets, and I'll never forget this. We're going looking at, where do you go for standing room only tickets? They sent us out to this box, straightaway center field, upper level, very top of the seats, and we're in this box. There's, 30, 35 other people there. I'm not real tall now, and I wasn't then either. So, I couldn't really see anything. Well, in that box, there's a ladder that goes to the roof. So I'm about 3 rungs up on the ladder, holding on, watching the game. My dad's at the bottom with a Coke and a hot dog, handing me stuff to eat and drink. And just something I'll never forget that he did that for me when I was just a kid. Never forget it. And we were there. I don't think we stayed through the second game. I think we did leave a little early because it was a long day standing on a ladder, and him, I don't even know if he got to see anything. He wasn't real tall either. So, but just something I'll never forget. And, spending time with my dad like that, that was really good. And it's something I've tried to pass on to my son and his kids as well. We've gone to some games as well and, watch the Braves, and, they know they're my favorite team. And we all like to do that, whether it's Braves games. We're here in Myrtle Beach now. They have a minor league team, Myrtle Beach Pelicans. Love going to those games as well. So just trying to pass that on that my dad gave me. But we had some other really, really cool experiences when, went to a lot of games over the years in the, you know, 70s, 80s. When I got to be 16, I could drive myself to the games. Me and my friends would go. Back then, the Braves didn't draw a whole lot because they weren't great. So, you could buy an upper level ticket, go to the stadium, and then pretty much sit anywhere you wanted to. So it was always a lot of fun when you're young because, sit in the seats by the dugout or wherever that you really couldn't afford normally. But in the early 80s, Braves got 82. They went on back then, it was the longest winning streak to start a season. They won 13 games straight. And after 12 games, they were on the road. They were coming home. Me and a buddy of mine went to the airport with a bunch of other people to watch the Braves come in and, cheer them on. That was a really cool experience. Back then, before a lot of the terrorist things that went on, you could actually, without a ticket, just go to the airport and go to the gate. So you could actually, they kind of had it roped off. Everybody was there at the gate. The team was flying commercially. So they'd come in, got to see all the players get off the plane. So that was pretty cool. And they made the playoffs that year for the first time in a long time. Of course, Dale Murphy was the star back then, one of my favorite players. Phil Niekro was their best starting pitcher, but, had a really good team. And they made the playoffs, and once they were definitely qualified for the playoffs, they would put all the playoff tickets on sale, including World Series tickets. And so, I had a little part-time job, saved up my money, went out and bought World Series tickets in '82, and, thinking, "Hey, picked a game." I think it was game 2 or something, or the second home game, and, had upper level seats. They were pretty expensive, but I had World Series tickets, really excited about it, and then they ended up getting eliminated in the first round. So didn't get to use those, but it was a fun time that year. And of course, then they were pretty bad the rest of the '80s until the '90s when Bobby Cox and the great pitchers Smoltz, Glavine, Maddox, and the great teams in the '90s, Chipper Jones as well. So a lot of fun watching them throughout the '90s when they were on their winning streak, won 15 straight division titles. So that was a lot of fun. So moving on with experiences with my dad. He actually, when they were 1996, when the Olympics were in Atlanta, they had the Olympic Stadium that they built, and they were going to transition the Braves to that stadium after the Olympics for the next year. So that would have been 97. So 96 was the last year in Fulton County Stadium. The new Olympic Stadium became Turner Field. So we were talking about it, toward the end of the season. I said, yeah, it's going to be the last season. And my dad said, I went to the very first game in Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, the very first regular season game. I said, you got to be kidding me, I didn't know that. And he said, yeah, I still got the ticket stub. I said, okay. He's got a ticket stub to the very first game. I got to figure out a way to go to the last game. So started looking around, scalpers or whatever. They actually had some ticket brokers in Atlanta, kind of legalized scalping, and contacted one of those, bought a couple tickets to the last regular season game. And, back then, real physical tickets, so I could give it to my dad afterwards so he could have, both those tickets. And so we ended up going, great time. They brought out all the old, Braves from all the previous teams, the ones that were still alive, all the stars. They introduced them all before the game, had a big ceremony, really a lot of fun. That was a great time that I got to spend with my dad because, players that he watched growing up, and you know, then the ones I watched as well growing up, they were all there. And so that was really a great time that we got to spend. And then a few years later, we continued to go to some games. My dad went to games with me and my son as well. We enjoyed those. And then my mom passed away. And after that, I was kind of like, we need to continue to do some stuff. We need to do some new things. So I wasn't sure if he'd go along with it, but I talked to my dad and we planned a trip to New York to go to Cooperstown to the Baseball Hall of Fame. So I got to take my dad to Cooperstown and flew up there and spent a day at Cooperstown. Really really a cool time. We went in, I think it was in March, so it's kinda early in the year, so it wasn't crowded. Cooperstown, if you've never been, go, it's great. Go to the Hall of Fame. If you wanna be there for all the ceremonies, it gets really crowded. But normally, Cooperstown is a small town. I think it's like, 4 or 5,000 people. That's it. And when we were there, it was like I said, it wasn't crowded. Now, when they have the Hall of Fame inductions, I think there's like 100,000 people in that town. It gets crazy. But when we were there, it was really nice. We spent the night. We had to drive in. There's not a airport really close. Got to drive about an hour and a half from Syracuse. I think we flew into you know, stayed the night, then we got up the next morning, hit it right when it opened. We were kind of one of the first ones there. Now, this was kinda cool. Mike Piazza and Ken Griffey Jr. were the inductees that year, and the day we were there, Mike Piazza was there doing a tour. His tour, I guess the inductees go do a tour beforehand. So he was actually there. We saw him, didn't get to talk to him or anything. Not one of my favorite players anyway, being a Braves fan, but, uh but that was kinda cool. He was there, and like I said, it wasn't crowded. We were one of the only people there. Got to take as much time as we wanted to go through the Hall of Fame. So just a great experience. If you're a big baseball fan, you've never been, take the time to do it. It's really a lot of fun, and you can go different times of the year when it's not crowded. So that was great. Then the following year, we went down to something I had always wanted to do. We went down to Brave spring training, and this was the last year they were in Orlando. And so we took a trip down there, went to a game there, and then also a game in Lake City where the Tigers spring training is, watch the Braves play the Tigers. So got to see a couple spring training games, and that was a lot of fun also. So got to do those kind of special trips with my dad and just really, really enjoyed those. Like I said, to kind of pay back, if you will, him for, all that he'd done for me and just instilling just the love of baseball in me where I really just love to watch the games. A lot of people think baseball is a little slow, kind of boring, but if you really, you know, hone in on the intricacies, pitchers, different pitches, what are they going to throw here? Kind of trying to guess what's the manager going to do, who's he going to bring in. It's just a lot of fun to do those things, and I know you as fans, if you're fans of baseball and teams, you know the same thing. I know you're doing that as well, and so that's the kind of stories that I'm wanting to get to. I'm wanting to get from other people, and like I said, not just baseball. Can be, NFL football, college football, basketball, college basketball, anything. Hockey, I'm not a big hockey fan. I like watching hockey in person, especially. Atlanta's had a couple teams but, I'm not a big fan, but I'll do some research and I'll talk to you about hockey. If that's your game and that's your team, I'd love to do that. So just looking for those everyday fans and then talk about your team, where they're at now. I do a lot of TikToks about the Braves. They're in spring training right now. Looking forward to a bounce back year after really a tough year last year. Tough last 2 years with injuries that they've had. A lot of injuries, and they're dealing with that a little bit now in the spring as well. But looking for some really bounce back years this year and, looking forward to having Acuna all year, just kind of getting into, what the Braves are doing this year. Looking for a full year of Acuna. He looks really good this spring so far, playing in the World Baseball Classic now. Ozzie Albies and Michael Harris really struggled the first half of the year last year. And, I think that really hurt the team, especially as good as Harris was, rookie of the year a couple years ago. In the second half, both of them were outstanding. It was just the Braves were too far out to make a push, plus all their starting pitchers were hurt. So looking forward to them having a bounce back year. I think Michael Harris can have a really good year. They've got the lineup back healthy where, he was really thriving when he was kind of hidden at the bottom of the lineup. And a lot of people think, hey, the speed that he has, he'd be a good top of the lineup guy. But things are changing the way teams are approaching that. When you see somebody, of course, Acuna hitting leadoff, I think he will again this year. You see a player like Kyle Schwarber hitting leadoff for the Phillies a couple years ago, and they're thriving with him doing that. You're thinking, he's not a leadoff hitter. He should be batting fourth. He hits home runs. But a lot of times you want your top hitter getting the most at bats. So that's the way teams are looking at it now. They're only the leadoff hitter, the first inning, definitely. You never know after that. So So, yeah, different ways. So Michael Harris really has thrived getting back to him hitting toward the bottom of the lineup, so I think he could be there again. You got Riley healthy. Olson's just been, great the last few years. He'll go through a little stretch now and then where he's in a little bit of a slump, but he always gets hot, never lasts long. And I think Riley's, completely healthy. He'll be really good this year as well. So looking forward to them. Drake Baldwin, second year. He was just awesome last year. So I think the Braves are really, looking to have a really good team. I hate the deal about Profar. Can't believe that happened again. I just don't know what to say about it. I want to like the guy. I want to give him benefit of the doubt, but the second time, I don't know, man. They're on the hook for next year for his salary. Maybe, if he comes back next year, has a good spring, they can trade him. I don't know, and get rid of that contract. But otherwise, they're on the hook for next year. He doesn't get paid this year. That's a good thing. So they're saving that $15 million. But I think they got some options at DH, so I think they'll be okay there. Shortstop, luckily they, brought in Dubon so he can play until Ha-Seong Kim gets back. Mike Yastrzemski's been just on fire this spring. Hopefully he can continue that into the regular season. Some people are a little skeptical about that signing, but, I think it'll turn out okay. So looking forward to, Chris Sale being back to form after, when he came back from his rib injury last year, he looked really good. Spencer Strider, hopefully he can get his velocity back closer to where he was a couple years ago. And Grant Holmes and Lopez, there's been some concerns about them coming back from injuries, but both of them looked really good this spring. So I think we're going in okay. Bryce Elder, fifth starter, struggled up and down, but, your fifth starter is going to be. I think sometimes people expect him to be better because the Braves counted on him so much last year. But he's as good as any fifth starter out there. Your fifth starter is not going to be your 2 ERA guy. So I think he'll be fine in that fifth starter role, and hopefully Joey Wentz dealt with a little leg injury here recently. Hopefully he'll bounce back and can fill in there. And they got some young guys also that are pitching really well this spring that I think we'll see before the end of the year. So looking forward to, the Braves 2026, and I'll continue my TikTok videos, kind of, going game by game and giving some updates on whatever I hear about that's going on. So definitely we'll do that. But if you want to dig deeper into the Braves, you want to be on the podcast, I'll talk Braves all day long, kind of your thoughts on. And again, I want that history. I want those stories, how you became the fan. I'm going to talk to my son. That'll be really great because, I love taking him to the games, but I'm curious if he's going to remember the first time he went to a Braves game. I remember it vividly. So I'm going to see if he does when he's on the podcast. He'll be the next episode. Then I've got some people that have been watching on TikTok that have hit me up that want to be on as well. Got some friends of mine that I know are fans of from some different sports. And like I said, I want to branch out into those as well. So really looking forward to having these conversations, looking forward to sharing them with you. And like I said, if you want to be on, send me a message. The Everyday Fan Podcast at gmail.com is an email you can reach out to me on, and we'll set it up. We'll get it out. And, looking forward to it. Just love talking sports. So I'm going to sign off now, and we'll talk to you the next time.